Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 504. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. I hope everybody had a nice Thanksgiving, got to enjoy some time with friends, family, eat some good food, and, watch football if that's your thing. If not, at least hopefully you got a day off of work and got to relax some. I did take it a little bit easy on Thanksgiving, so this will probably not be as long as most of the shows that we've been doing recently, but we do have a lot of really important stuff to talk about. So I didn't want to just skip this show because I think I want to get an update out there, particularly on the situation in Gaza with the ceasefire now underway. So I'll have that information. And before we get into it, I just want to take a minute and mention that we are started our end of the year fundraiser at the Libertarian Institute. So if you have the means, please head on over to the Institute and make a contribution. We really need to hit our fundraising goal this time. It'd be really important for us to do that. And of course, you guys get so much great content from the Institute. I hope you see it as being worth your money. Several books have now been published at the Institute. The most recent is Joseph Solis Mullen's book on China. We have forthcoming books coming out by Thomas Woods, James Bovard, and Scott Horton, along with Keith Knight. So lots of great stuff coming at the Institute on the long-term big projects books. But just every day, there's always new op-eds at the Institute, brand new podcasts. It's not just the Scott Horton Show, Conflicts of Interest. Keith Knight, Patrick McFarlane, and Tommy Solomon's also all host shows with the Institute. So we do a lot of really important work. And of course, my role there is a news editor. So I'm writing news stories and putting together the daily news roundup. Anyways, again, if you can, head on over to the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/donate, make a contribution, give what you can, figure out, it's end of the year, so figure out your tax situation because we are a tax deductible institution, and, figure out how much you could give us to curb what you're giving to the government. All right, and if you can't make a contribution, I get it. Times are tough for a lot of people, but just share out the show or share the fundraiser. Recommend to people, make a donation. That really helps. So either the show or the fundraiser, do what you can to put the word out there. And with that, we will get into today's show. The first story I have here is a poll on the war in Ukraine. 45% of Americans say the U.S. is spending too much in Ukraine. The poll was conducted by the Associated Press and finds that 59% of Republican voters oppose a massive amount of aid being sent to Ukraine. Congress is currently considering a huge spending bill to support the war in Ukraine and the Israeli war in Gaza. 45% of Americans say the U.S. is doing too much around the globe. And so kind of, some what we see with Joe Biden's foreign policy and the approval with his Israel policy, where those two numbers are almost the same. Here we have something very similar where the amount of Americans who say the U.S. is spending too much in Ukraine also see the U.S. is doing too much around the globe. I thought the reason why I thought this was a good sign is that's nearly half of Americans. Now, the problem is we really had to start holding our politicians' feet to the fire on this issue. We constantly elect presidents who say they're going to do less wars, get involved in less conflicts. Biden ran on getting the U.S. out of the Middle East, and the war in Afghanistan may be over, but the situation in Israel has us more entrenched there than ever before. All right, next up, I just wanted to mention this one. Turkey tells NATO that Sweden won't join by next week's meeting. And this comes, I think, maybe as a little bit of a surprise that Turkey is continuing to drag its feet on Sweden's membership bid. Earlier this year, the Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, had indicated that they were ready to move forward on approving Turkey and NATO. But now it seems like there's some kind of hold up there. And the actual logistics of what's going on is the approval for Sweden's NATO membership is in the legislative committee in Ankara, but the legislator is controlled by Erdogan's political party. So if he wanted to move forward quickly, it would. They're saying that this upcoming week, So that'll be the week after Thanksgiving, I think the 28th and the 29th, so Tuesday and Wednesday. There's supposed to be a gathering of NATO officials and foreign ministers, and there was some hope that NATO would be able to formally approve Sweden's membership bid there, because all the members, with Turkey would have then approved it, and they could do the formal ceremonial thing with the NATO alliance. And it appears that will have to be put on hold, because the same days they're now doing committee hearings to decide if Turkey really wants to do this. Again, I think all this procedural stuff is them just trying to exact more concessions from Turkey, from NATO, from the US to get Turkey to approve Sweden's membership bid. All right, so I've saw this reported in some Ukrainian media, and I didn't bring it up on the show because I thought the sourcing was a little weak. But now I also read it in Newsweek, so I thought it's at least worth bringing up on the show and mentioning. And even though I want to emphasize that, don't say that this is happening. We need to say that this may be happening. So Newsweek reports that the U.S. may send Ukraine modified HIMARS launchers capable of firing long-range munitions. The Secretary of Defense, that's Lloyd Austin, announced last week a $100 million weapons transfer to Ukraine. He said that while in Kiev, and there was only one HIMARS launcher in that package, which is a little bit different. Usually they announce they're sending multiple HIMARS. My initial thought was, oh, they must need, they're one short of a squad or something like that, and so they need just one, and the Americans are running out of surplus HIMARS launchers, and so they're not eager to send Ukraine a lot of these. They're only sending them the bare minimum. But then I read again in Ukrainian press that the reason they're only sending one is it's a modified launcher. So early in the war, I would say 6 months into the war, there was a report in the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. had secretly modified the HIMARS that it has sent Ukraine so that they could only fire the short-range 50 mile range rockets, not the Army tactical rockets, the ATACMS that have a range of about 200 miles. And so I'm not sure what they did. I don't know how the HIMARS system works well enough to say. My guess is that the rockets with a longer range are probably longer, so they either probably put something, that made it so you couldn't slide out whatever you need to slide out to put the longer rocket in, or put an extra piece in so that longer rocket wouldn't fit or something like that. But whatever it is, they report that the U.S. was doing this with the HIMARS they sent to Ukraine out of concern that Ukraine would take the HIMARS and would happily take the 50-mile range rockets that the U.S. sent them thousands and thousands of, but then they would get Poland or another Baltic state to send them, or another European state to send them the long range missiles, and the Americans didn't want that to happen. And so they modified the systems in some way. And so this would seem to be a HIMARS without whatever kind of modification that is. Again, this is only a report from Newsweek, but it seems kind of truthful to me now that I'm seeing it reported in the American and the Ukrainian press. All right, next up here, 2 NATO states make weapon pledges to Ukraine. Bulgaria said that it will send armored vehicles to Ukraine that are no longer needed in Bulgaria. Lithuania pledges to send 3 million remote detonation systems. I'm not entirely sure of what those are. I imagine there's some kind of suicide drone type systems. And Lithuania is also sending winter equipment. Additionally, North Macedonia announced it had trained a group of Ukrainian soldiers that would soon return to the battlefield. And then one more article here on the war in Ukraine. I wrote this one today, November 24th, for antiwar.com. Russia claims to foil major Ukrainian attack on Crimea. Ukraine launched one of its largest drone attacks targeting the Crimean Peninsula since Russia invaded the country last year. The Russian Defense Ministry reported downing 16 Ukrainian drones near or above Crimea. The attack on the critical peninsula comes as Russian forces are close to taking a key city in the Donbass. So according to the Associated Press, Kiev, and this is what they said, launched one of the biggest drone attacks on the Crimean Peninsula on Thursday. I don't know how the AP counts and qualifies that. I've certainly seen Ukraine target Crimea with a dozen or so drones on a few occasions, but this was 16, possibly more. There was a another Russian minister that had just put out on his social media that I think he said there were dozens of drones. Certainly 16 could be dozens to an official stretching the truth. So, it's between 16 and probably 20 something drones that were used in this attack. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, which published a statement on TASS, which is Russian state media, it said an attempt by the Kiev regime to carry out a terrorist attack using aerial drones against sites on the territory of the Russian Federation was thwarted. Air defense systems destroyed 16 drones, including 13 over the Crimean Peninsula and 3 over the territory of the Volgograd region. This is just an area north of the Crimean Peninsula. The Russian statement did not comment on the damage or casualties caused by the intercepted drones. The Associated Press notes it could not independently confirm the Russian claims, and Ukraine has not issued a statement. And so I kind of believe the attack was likely thwarted just because there's no major touting on the Ukrainian side of some success, which is what you usually see, even if the success is very limited. After Washington backed a coup in Kiev in 2014 that ushered in an ultra-nationalist Ukrainian government, the heavily Russian population of Crimea was annexed by Moscow, a decision supported by the people of the peninsula. Ukrainian President Zelensky has pledged that he will continue to fight Russian occupation of his country until Crimea is reclaimed. However, Russia views the peninsula as historically part of Russia, and it's critical to its strategic position. Additionally, Kiev ordered thousands of soldiers to attempt to retake Crimea this summer, only to gain almost no territory towards that objective. So, there's the kind of historical, strategic, what this means to Russia aspect of this that we've talked about a lot on the show. So I want to spend a ton of time on this today because I really want to cover the Israel stuff because I think that's a little bit more important than this right now. But but on top of that, there's also the practical issue here, which is Ukraine just doesn't have the ability to retake the Crimean Peninsula. So Moscow has focused its forces on taking Avdiivka, which is a city in the northeastern Donetsk region. The city is viewed as strategic to the front lines of Ukraine's Donbass region. Avdiivka had a pre-war population of 32,000, which has shrunk to just over 1,000. According to South Front, Russian forces are making gains in the north of the city and slowly encircling Avdiivka, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when they take it. People are reporting that this could be a collapse of the Ukrainian front lines and that Ukraine has poured a lot of soldiers into this. There were certainly those reports surrounding the Bakhmut battle as well, which is in a similar region to of Ukraine as Avdiivka. And while that didn't go well, and while that probably contributed to the Ukrainian failed summer counteroffensive, it didn't lead to the collapse of the Ukrainian army. And so we take all these statements when people say, oh, we're just about to see the collapse of the Ukrainian army with a very large grain of salt here. Now, next up, let's move on. U.S. Philippines start 3-day joint patrols in the South China Sea. The U.S. and the Philippines have launched joint air and sea patrols in the South China Sea in a provocative show of force amid rising tensions with China and the region. Washington and Manila agreed earlier this year to conduct joint patrols in the disputed waters. In September, a U.S. and Philippines warship conducted bilateral sail in the South China Sea, but the patrol launched on Tuesday is being billed as the first of its kind in 7 years. Today marks the beginning of joint maritime and air patrols, a collaborative effort between the armed forces of the Philippines and the United States Indo-Pacific Command in the West Philippine Sea. And that was a statement from the Philippines President Ferdinand Bongbong, B-O-N-G, Marcos Jr. And that's actually what his Twitter account says, by the way. It almost looks like some kind of fake Twitter account because, it just, in the American, at least it seems silly that his name is Bongbong, but this is actually what his Twitter handle says. So just know that's his nickname. According to the Financial Times, the patrol includes 3 Philippines warships and 3 Philippines aircraft joined by U.S. Navy littoral combat ships and a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft. Interesting here because the LCS, the littoral combat ships, are known as little crappy ships because of their ineffectiveness and multiple problems despite massive price tag. So the patrols were ended 7 years ago by Marcos Jr.'s predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte, and did not include aircraft. The patrols kicked off near the island of Mavulis, the Philippines' northernmost island, which is just over 60 miles from the Taiwanese territory. The patrol then headed further west into the South China Sea. Emboldened by U.S. support, Marcos Jr. has taken a much harder line against China's claims in the South China Sea than Duterte. During the past year, dangerous encounters between Chinese and Philippine vessels near disputed routes and reefs have become common. Whenever these incidents occur, the U.S. reminds China of the our U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, which applies to attacks on Philippines boats in the South China Sea. Washington and Manila have taken steps to strengthen their decades-old military alliance, and the U.S. has been granted access to 4 more bases in the country, including 3 in the north near Taiwan. And so, that's really significant that we have the Philippines really provoking Beijing right now, and every time they do, the Americans go, China, we have a mutual defense agreement with the Philippines that applies to these ships out in the middle of the South China Sea, so don't you do anything because we'll respond. All right, one story on North Korea here before we get into the news on Gaza. North Korea scraps 2018 military pact with South after Seoul wants back commitments. And so I've actually written a couple articles on North Korea in the past week, but I felt like this one kind of summarized everything up the best. So, amid escalating tensions in the region, North Korea has withdrawn from a 2018 agreement with South Korea that reduced military tensions on the Korean peninsula. Pyongyang took this step after Seoul announced it would resume surveillance operations along the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. The relationship between Pyongyang and Seoul has been in a downward spiral since President Joe Biden took office. Tensions between North and South Korea spiked last week when Pyongyang successfully placed a military satellite into orbit. North Korean state media reported that the satellite allowed Kim Jong-un to view images of U.S. military facilities in Guam. Seoul and its backers in Tokyo and Washington condemned the satellite launch, claiming it violated UN resolutions. Pyongyang insists that it was within North Korea's right as a sovereign country to have a space-based surveillance technology. In response to North Korea's successful launch, South Korea walked back its commitments to a 2018 Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement, also known as a CMA. The CMA reduced tensions on the peninsula by limiting military activities. South Korea announced it was breaking the CMA on Wednesday by resuming surveillance flights along the North Korean border. Seoul's defense minister explained North Korea's satellite launch is a clear violation of the UN Security Council resolution and a serious provocation against South Korea and the international community. The South Korean Ministry of National Defense spokesperson stated North Korea's behavior shows that it has no willingness to comply with the CMA. The North Korean Defense Ministry said that Pyongyang would completely vacate the agreement. We will immediately restore all military measures that have been halted according to the North-South Military Agreement, and that was a statement that was posted on North Korean state media KCNA. It said, "We will withdraw the military steps taken to prevent tensions and conflict in all spheres, including sea, air, and deploy ground, sea, and air, and deploy more powerful armed forces and new types of military hardware in the region along the demarcation line," that's the DMZ. The military statement continued that South Korea must pay dearly for their irresponsible and grave political and military provocations that have pushed the present situation to an uncontrollable phase. After President Joe Biden took office, the U.S. and South Korea resumed large-scale live-fire war games on the Korean Peninsula. Pyongyang views the operations as preparations for regime change in North Korea. The White House has further escalated tensions on the peninsula by deploying multiple strategic weapons platforms to South Korea and forming a trilateral pact with Seoul and Tokyo that Pyongyang views as an Asian NATO. So, pretty big news here. I think, this has really happened on the back burner. In fact, I even occasionally will see a libertarian say, oh, well, at least Joe Biden's doing okay on North Korea. That's really not true. The death here is just not getting very much coverage. All right, let's move on and start getting into what's happening in Gaza. Now, the hostage agreement, I don't have an article on this. I was just doing my best to read through the breaking news feeds that are out there this morning to kind of get an idea of what was going on. So it does seem that the hostage agreement is now in effect. The 4-day pause in fighting in Gaza, which Hezbollah said that they will respect, is in effect as of now. There was some gunfire in Gaza immediately after this. I believe the residents of Gaza thought that they would all be able to return home. I'm sure there are people who fled to South Gaza from North Gaza when instructed by Israel. And those people, probably have some possessions, some food, things like that. Maybe family members that didn't make it out who they want to go check up on in North Gaza. And so when they tried to travel there after the ceasefire began, they were fired upon, and at least 2 of them were killed by Israeli soldiers who, I guess, are just making it clear that nobody is going to be allowed to return to North Gaza once they flee to South Gaza. Now, this seems very indicative of a ethnic cleansing campaign, right? That you're not letting people return to their homes, that you're trying to drive all of them out of a particular area. Seems really problematic to me. Now, other than that, my understanding is this is, I don't want to say going smoothly because, nothing is smooth right now in Gaza, but there don't seem to be too many claims of violations of this ceasefire, at least on the first day. Hamas, I believe, is reported to have turned over 13 Israelis and a dozen Indonesians to the Red Cross, and those people are in the process of being released to Israel. I don't know what that process looks like, how long it's going to take from them to get from the hospitals. I don't think Israel is allowing them to cross from the Gaza Strip directly into Israel. They're going through Rafah. Now, this could be logistical, that the hostages are being held somewhere near Rafah and it's just a shorter distance, or logistically easier to get out of the Rafah border crossing. However, Israel has been pretty firm in shutting down all of its border crossings with Gaza, and is even forcing aid to get checked at an Israeli border crossing and then proceed through Egypt into Gaza through Rafah before aid enters. And this is really slowing down the aid process. So I just want to point that out. And I think there's about 25 or more, maybe about 50 Palestinians that were set to be released on the first day. There was a little over a dozen young men, teenage Palestinian boys, and then another couple dozen women who were all supposed to be released. I'm not sure what the process of all that is and where we are on that process. So I'll probably have more updates on Monday, especially if the ceasefire is still holding. Then we'll have a lot of details, I'm sure, on how this is all playing out logistically and if it could possibly continue past, the initial 4 days. So I guess that would be Monday or Tuesday that the ceasefire would be set to expire. Maybe it could be expanded to include more hostages. That being said, I don't think it's likely for reasons we'll really start to get into here. Now, this is the first story that I have on kind of the ceasefire status. Biden admin worries the pause in Gaza will give journalists more access to expose Israeli atrocities. That is some headline, huh? This is from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. There has been concern within the Biden administration that a pause in fighting in Gaza will give journalists the opportunity to expose more of the atrocities Israel has been committing, Politico reported on Tuesday. The concern was related to the hostage deal that was reached between Israel and Hamas, that, if implemented, will occur over a 4-day pause in the Israeli bombardment and ground campaigns in Gaza. The report said that some of the concern the administration about unprecedented consequence of the pause, that it will allow journalists broader access to Gaza and the opportunity to further illuminate the devastation there and turn public opinion on Israel. So they're just saying that Israel is committing atrocities in Gaza, and if the American public sees them, they may get upset about that and turn against Israel, and the Joe Biden administration doesn't want that to happen. I mean, it kind of says it all right there. The situation in Gaza has been absolutely horrific. The death toll is now estimated to be over 14,000. But maybe with the pause in fighting, if it goes on for a couple days, we'll get a real update to the number, which I believe was last updated on November 10th, and that was just over 11,000. And of course, journalists have been widely targeted in this war. 46 Palestinian journalists have been killed so far. And so, that is partly to keep the communications blackout in place. And then that's another important part of it too, is that Israel has put and kept a communications blackout in place in Gaza. And so even if there are Palestinians who are documenting war crimes committed against them, they managed to keep their phones charged, get a phone charge, something like that, so they're able to record some video that way, or they have other recording devices or things like that. Israel is really knocking out and not allowing the communications infrastructure of Gaza to work, and so a lot of that evidence may be still stored in Gaza, and of course, if you kill the people who have that evidence, the journalists, then it will never reach the public. One of the reasons it doesn't seem like the pause in fighting is going to last too long is Israel really didn't want to agree to it. So I put this together on Twitter. Axios reports Biden made over a dozen calls to Netanyahu to push the Israeli leader to agree to a hostage swap and pause in fighting. The article says that while the White House has publicly maintained its full-throated support for Tel Aviv, in private, Biden has put some pressure on Netanyahu. It said privately, Biden ramped up pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the course of 13 phone calls to pause the fighting in Gaza in order to secure the release of hostages and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Biden has faced increasing pressure from his base to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. The hostage agreement was scheduled to begin on Thursday, and then it actually began on Friday. Netanyahu said the White House was able to use its leverage to get more Israeli hostages freed at a lower price. And I think the really important thing there is the lower price, because I believe the price that Netanyahu is talking about is the length of the ceasefire. To release all these hostages, Hamas was hoping to have a 5-day ceasefire, and that was whittled down to 4 over the course of negotiations. So Israel doesn't want this ceasefire to be in place and pause and fighting to be in place. And I think if you look at Netanyahu in particular, he probably has a particular incentive against it. He's legitimately charged with corruption and seems very concerned that if he isn't the prime minister of Israel, he could very well go to jail. And so he's doing everything he can to cling to power. And I think one of the things helping him cling to power is continuing this war. When this first happened, one of the things I thought was the Hamas attack on Israel was a Hamas attack on Israel. I'm not trying to say that Netanyahu planned the attack and carried out the attack. However, it is a result of Netanyahu's policy to make sure that Hamas was essentially a counterweight to the Palestinian Authority. And because Hamas controlled Gaza and the Palestinian Authority controlled the West Bank, there really wasn't a negotiating partner with the Palestinians to be had, because one of the sides was militant. And so, they could always use Hamas to say, oh, we can't have any talks or negotiation. And so Hamas's attack on October 7th, really, that policy blew up in Netanyahu's face. And so I really worry that in an effort to restore his legacy, he would just carry out the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and get it done with. And yeah, all that dirt will get on his hands while he's on his way out of office anyways. But then Israel could sweep in a new government and would have taken another huge chunk and kicked another massive portion of the Palestinians out of historic Palestine. All right. Next up here, Dave DeCamp again, antiwar.com. U.S. doesn't think Israel can make good on hostage deal promise to increase aid. The Biden administration told the Times of Israel that they do not believe Israel can live up to its commitment to allow 200 trucks of aid to enter Gaza per day during the pause that's a part of the hostage deal with Hamas. The official said that Israel is refusing to open the Kerem Shalom border crossing with Gaza during the 4-day pause or at any time after. Only Egypt's Rafah crossing is available. 200 aid trucks will be unlikely to be able to use that crossing every day. When Israel unleashed its bombing campaign after the October 7th attack, it initially refused to allow any aid to enter Gaza. After agreeing to let some in, Israel first required trucks to be inspected at the a point in Israel, the border crossing there. I believe it's the Kerem Shalom crossing, and then it was allowed to proceed through Egypt and get inspected into or cross into Gaza through Rafah. So the extra steps have slowed down and limited the amount of aid that's entering Gaza. I think I've done a pretty good job, and this will be familiar to most of our audience. I think Israel is trying to kind of replicate what Saudi Arabia does with Yemen here, where they're able to slow down the aid that gets into Yemen. This isn't as intense as it was in, say, 2017, 2018, 2019, but it is still the case that there is a little bit of a blockade of Yemen. And so everything that gets into Yemen that is going to be dropped off at the Yemen port of Hodeidah has to first be inspected, I believe, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And so by the time the aid makes it to Jeddah and then gets into Hodeidah, it just slows the process down so much. Some of the goods expire and spoil in that amount of time. And so it's a way to increase suffering on the people while claiming that you have a process in place to allow aid into the country. So the Biden administration officials said Israel's stance is really problematic because the level of aid going into Gaza now is totally unsustainable. They said Israel's reasoning for not opening the crossings to Gaza is completely political, since there are no security concerns about aid entering Gaza. Israeli officials have frequently pointed out the limited aid that they are allowing to enter Gaza to justify their continued onslaught, which the UN relief chief has caused the worst humanitarian crisis he's ever seen, even worse than the killing fields in Cambodia. Qatar said on Thursday that the pause in fighting is scheduled to begin at 7 a.m. local time on Friday, which I believe it did begin at the scheduled time, with hostage releases, as we said, starting later that day. And that is going on. Now, this is just obnoxious from Netanyahu. He says the UN isn't doing enough for Palestinians in Gaza. The Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on Thursday accused the UN of not doing enough to respond to the humanitarian crisis that he created in Gaza. I have not yet seen the effort that I'd like to see from the United Nations and the international agencies to build shelters there in Gaza. The Israeli leader said there is no reason not to erect tens of thousands of tents in the safe zone or next to the safe zone. It is unclear what safe zone he's referring to, as Israel has continued to bomb southern Gaza after telling the Palestinians to evacuate the north. The Israeli bombardment has displaced 1.7 million people in Gaza, 4/5 of the enclave's population. It has also killed more than 11,000 people, including over 4,500 children. While Netanyahu has criticized the United Nations response, his campaign in Gaza has killed over 100 UN workers. And so Obviously, this is just stupid because Netanyahu is doing everything he can to drag his feet on allowing aid trucks into Gaza. So, even if the UN wanted to do more, he actually wouldn't let them. But also, something really important here is Gaza is under Israeli military occupation. This is within Israeli territory. These are people that they keep in essentially a giant open air prison. And so the idea that Netanyahu is looking towards other bodies to have to go and provide aid to the Palestinians is completely wrongheaded, and actually Israel is responsible for their well-being. So, a doctor at the Al-Shifa hospital said evacuations from the hospital have been totally unsafe, but they had no other choice. And then some of those doctors were reported to have been arrested and held for questioning. So next up here, we have Doctors Without Borders reporting that 3 doctors in Gaza had been killed at a hospital in northern Gaza on Tuesday. The group issued a statement that said, Medical Sans Frontières is a French organization, Doctors Without Borders. So MSF is their international acronym, but Americans know it as Doctors Without Borders, or DWS, has regularly shared information about Wada as a functioning hospital in the presence of staff of Al-Wada in 2 warring parties. GPS coordinates were also shared with Israeli authorities yesterday, but that site was bombed anyways and killed 3 people. The organization said that seeing doctors killed next to a hospital bed is beyond tragic, and this must stop now. It's also interesting that Politico report the White House has been sharing the location of humanitarian facilities in Gaza with Tel Aviv in hopes to curb civilian casualties. However, Israel has bombed some of those locations anyways. Next up here, over 50 members of one single Palestinian family were killed in a set of airstrikes. So 52 members of the Kadora family were killed in the Jabalia refugee camp. Palestinian Foreign Minister Raed al-Maliki said only this morning from the Qaeda family in Jabalia, 52 people have been wiped out, completely killed. I have a list of names here. 52 of them were wiped out completely, from grandfather to grandchildren. The Israeli strikes occurred hours after Hamas and Tel Aviv agreed to a hostage exchange that included a 4-day pause in fighting. The deal was scheduled to be implemented on Thursday, but Israel announced it would begin on Friday. And so again, a part of the reason, and a part of why I'm guessing is Israel's strategy here, is they don't really want to be the ones. They don't want to be the ones that actually break this agreement. And so I think they're leading up to this, carrying out a strike like this, killing 50 members of one family, trying to provoke some kind of reaction from Hamas so they don't have to implement the agreement. But I think during, this hostage release agreement, Israel is going to act as belligerently as possible without crossing lines of the agreement to try to provoke Hamas into some kind of response. For example, shooting the Palestinians that are trying to go back to their homes in North Gaza. All right, next up here. Former U.S. official says American rifles used by Israeli settlers against Palestinians in the West Bank. A former State Department official told Middle East Eye that it is almost a certainty that American guns have already been used by settlers in the West Bank. Josh Paul, who was a director in the State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs until he resigned last month, said some of the guns that the U.S. will have exported will have gone through license to the Israeli Defense Forces, and of course, most military-age settlers are reservists. So if they have their guns from the IDF, regardless of whether or not they're being handed out by Ben Gvir in most cases. And so he's saying that, look, all these reservists get to take their guns home. All these American weapons can be used by the settlers to harass their Palestinian neighbors. And Connor Freeman will be back on the show sometime next week, and he has a lot of what's going on in the West Bank. And of course, he's talked about a lot on the show, just the the harassment and the killing of people in the West Bank and driving them from their homes, taking away people's economic livelihoods by attacking their olive trees and things like that is just rampant right now. And so giving those people weapons is very dangerous to the Palestinians that are living there. All right, next up here, ex-Obama advisor says killing 4,000 Palestinian children wasn't enough. A former member of the Obama administration's National Security Council was caught on camera harassing a food truck vendor in New York City, saying that killing 4,000 Palestinian children wasn't enough. Stuart Sheldowitz was identified online after a video of him harassing the vendor about Islam were posted to X. He later admitted to the Daily Beast that was him in the video. He said, "The bottom line is yes, it's me." Sheldowitz served as the acting director of the National Security Council South Asia Directorate under Obama and was the deputy director of the State Department's Israel and Palestine affairs from 1999 to 2003. So, that's interesting because it spans the Clinton and the Bush administrations. In recent years, Sheldowitz has been working for a Gotham Government Relations, a lobbying group firm, and after the video surfaced, the lobbying group cut its ties with Sheldowitz. His rants, a lot of them were the kind of just like hateful stuff that you almost only associate with mental illness. Like you would think that, somebody who feels compelled to go up to a Muslim man, just a Muslim man who's trying to sell food and make money for his family, not somebody who's out, in the street claiming that people had to join the jihad or anything like that. Just a guy selling some food, trying to make some money for his family. And this guy comes up to him and is saying that the Prophet Muhammad is a rapist and he knows that he's a rapist. And what do you think of that? Do you have a problem with that? Why won't, blah, 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 blah. Particularly as a libertarian, right? Although saying that to somebody is problematic just on a human level, right? But not necessarily illegal. Where I think he really runs into problems with the laws, he says, that's why you're selling food in a cart, because you're ignorant. You should learn English. They will deport you back to Egypt, and then the secret police will want to interview you. And he also said, threatened any family that the guy had back in Egypt that he would have the Egyptian secret police interview, which means torture, right? Like this is pretty disgusting to say this to someone. And so, he's making threats and things like that. And at the very end, Dave DeCamp here notes another thing they said. If we killed 4,000 Palestinian kids, you know what? It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. So this man is a psycho. And also, the Gray Zone points out, they have a couple videos of him doing basically the same, not as vile, but within the realm, the same kind of behavior directed towards Russian diplomats in the United States. And so just a couple things here. One, this is probably the typical type of person that you have in the State Department within the ranks of the U.S. government. These are not the best of us. These are not people who understand other people's cultures or who, could put themselves in the shoes of the Palestinians or a Muslim and understand how they may, they're sociopaths. They're absolutely crazy, deranged people who should not be anywhere near power whatsoever. And then, the second point here is just that think about what it means that this guy, this violent racist, was in charge or had a significant hand over the U.S.-Israel policy from 1999. The U.S.-Israel policy from 1999 to 2003. It's extremely disturbing, and it helps to understand how the situation got as bad as it did. All right, next up here, U.S. launches second round of airstrikes in Iraq. U.S. warplanes hit targets in Iraq early Wednesday morning, marking the second round of U.S. airstrikes in the country in just over 24 hours. The first strikes came from a U.S. AC-130 gunship that targeted people in Iraq and Syria. and they say, I think 3 militants, but I heard it was actually more. And then the militants were carrying out an attack on the Al-Assad air base in western Iraq. The U.S. says that it shot down more drones fired by the Houthis in Yemen. The U.S. press release said on the morning of November 23rd, the USS Hunter or Thomas Hoodner shot down multiple one-way attack drones while the U.S. warship was on patrol in the Red Sea. The ship and its crew sustained no damage or injuries. The last time this happened, the statement sounded a lot more like the ship itself was the target of the attack, and the Pentagon later came out and suggested that actually Israel was. And given this statement, my guess is that the Houthis launched those drones against Israel. All right, next up here, last story today. U.S. considers redesignating Yemen's Houthis as terrorists. The White House says considering redesignating Yemen's Houthis as terrorists after the Houthis seized an Israeli-linked vessel in the Red Sea in response to the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. Boy, it's been a long time since we really talked about Yemen on this show, and in part that's because for the past couple of years there's been a ceasefire in that country that has more or less held, and things in that country have not continued to deteriorate. So that's been the good news, but redesignating the Houthis will probably undo all that process and progress, and so it could make the situation in Yemen much worse very quickly. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. We'll be back with more next week. Oh, gotta say, huge shout out to co-host of the show, Connor Freeman. Got a big shout out from Dave Smith on the Joe Rogan Experience, biggest podcast in the world. And so we'll have Connor on the show next week, and he'll have to talk about his article that Dave was referencing on the show. So thanks, everyone.